Everyone thought Dean Martin's biggest secret was that apple juice in his glass. They were wrong. The glass was nothing compared to what he carried in his briefcase. While Frank Sinatra was chasing mobsters for thrills, Dean was running actual operations for people who made the mob look like choir boys. This is the story of how America's coolest entertainer became one of its most valuable assets. A story so classified that even his own family didn't know the truth until decades after his death. Picture this. It's 2:30 a.m., December 1962. The Sands Hotel is winding down from another legendary Rat Pack show. Frank and Sammy are holding court in the lounge, telling the same stories to the same high rollers. But Dean quietly slips out the back exit, not to his penthouse, but to a nondescript sedan, parked in the employee garage. The driver doesn't speak, the windows are tinted black, and the license plate, it doesn't exist in any Nevada DMV database. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Dean Martin became the CIA's most unlikely asset, we have to go back to 1957. We have to go back to a night that changed everything, when a simple favor for an old friend pulled the king of cool into the shadow world of international espionage. The call came during Dean's stint at the Flamingo. It wasn't his agent. It wasn't a studio executive. It was Tony Marotta, a guy Dean knew from his dealer days back in Steubenville. Tony had moved to Washington, landed a government job he couldn't talk about, and now he needed Dean's help. "I need you to watch someone," Tony said over the crackling long-distance line. "Just watch and remember." The someone was Colonel Viktor Petrov, a Soviet cultural attaché, who was spending a suspicious amount of time at Vegas casinos. The favor seemed simple. Dean would perform at a private party where Petrov would be present, keep his eyes open, and report back what he saw. Easy money for someone who read people for a living. What Dean witnessed that night would haunt him for weeks. Petrov wasn't gambling. He was conducting business. Dean watched from the stage as the Russians slipped small packages to various casino employees. Package after package, always during the applause, always during the music. These weren't poker chips being exchanged. These were something else entirely. Dean didn't know it yet, but he had just witnessed a Soviet spy network in operation, and his detailed report would help the FBI crack one of the biggest espionage rings on American soil. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Tony Marotta called again 3 weeks later. This time, he had a proposition that would change Dean's life forever. "How would you like to serve your country?" Tony asked, "while doing exactly what you're already doing?" You have to understand Dean's mindset in 1957. He was at the top of his game professionally, but personally he was restless. The movies with Jerry Lewis were behind him. The Rat Pack was fun, but Frank's mob obsession made him nervous. Dean craved something real, something meaningful, something that mattered beyond the applause. Tony's offer was elegant in its simplicity. Dean would continue his normal career, the shows, the movies, the travel, but he would also serve as an intelligence gatherer. His natural cover was perfect. Who would suspect the drunk act? Who would think that the guy stumbling around the stage with a martini glass was actually memorizing conversations, license plates, and faces? The beauty of Dean's recruitment was that it required almost no lifestyle changes. He was already traveling internationally for shows. He was already meeting foreign dignitaries, businessmen, and politicians. He was already invited to private parties where important people said important things after a few drinks. The only difference now was that Dean would remember those things for reasons beyond entertainment. His first real assignment came in 1958, during a European tour. Dean was scheduled to perform in Rome, and there was a particular Italian businessman who would be in attendance. This businessman had been selling American industrial secrets to Eastern European buyers, and the CIA needed proof. Dean's job was simple: get close, gain trust, and listen. What happened that night in Rome revealed something crucial about Dean Martin's character. He wasn't just naturally charming, he was naturally invisible. People felt comfortable around him because he seemed harmless, distracted, slightly drunk. They would speak freely in his presence, as if he wasn't really there. It was the perfect cover for intelligence work. The Italian businessman, convinced that Dean was just another dim American celebrity, spent 20 minutes detailing his next sale to a Soviet buyer. Dean memorized every word, every date, every location. The resulting CIA operation shut down an entire spy network and saved millions of dollars in American technology from falling into enemy hands. But Dean's value to the intelligence community went far beyond his ability to eavesdrop at parties. By 1960, Dean had become what intelligence professionals call a platform. His celebrity status gave him access to places and people that trained spies could never reach. Embassy parties, international film festivals, private yacht gatherings. Dean moved through this world naturally, and people talked around him as if he wasn't there. His handlers were amazed by his professionalism. Dean never took notes, never asked obvious questions, never broke character. He would perform his show, work his cover, and then disappear into the night to make his reports. The information he provided was pure gold. Arms deals, diplomatic secrets, corporate espionage, political conspiracies. The most valuable intelligence Dean ever gathered came from an unexpected source: his golf games. Dean played golf with everyone: movie stars, politicians, business tycoons, foreign diplomats. And on the golf course, people relaxed. They spoke freely about things they would never discuss in boardrooms or embassy dinners. It was during a foursome in Palm Springs in 1961 that Dean overheard a conversation that would prevent a terrorist attack on American soil. A Middle Eastern businessman, convinced he was among friends, casually mentioned a planned bombing at a major American airport. Dean's quick thinking and careful memory saved hundreds of lives, though the story never made the papers. It couldn't. Dean's cover was too valuable to blow. But the most shocking part of this story isn't what Dean did for his country. It's what his country did to him in return. The psychological toll of living a double life began showing in the mid-1960s. Dean had always been private, but now he was becoming paranoid. He started checking his hotel rooms for listening devices. He would change his routine randomly, take different routes home, vary his schedules unpredictably. The casual coolness that had always defined him was becoming a carefully constructed wall. His family noticed the changes. Jane Martin later told friends that Dean would sometimes disappear for days without explanation. He would receive phone calls that would make him tense, nervous. He started drinking alone, not the apple juice stage prop, but real alcohol to calm his nerves after particularly difficult assignments. The breaking point came in 1968. During the height of the Cold War, Dean was asked to do something that crossed a line he didn't know he had. The details remain classified to this day, but those who knew Dean best say it involved compromising someone he considered a friend. For the first time since 1957, Dean said no to an assignment. The response from his handlers was swift and chilling. They reminded Dean that he knew things, secrets that could destroy careers, topple governments, start wars. They made it clear that his cooperation was no longer voluntary, it was compulsory. This is when Dean Martin made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He didn't quit the intelligence world, he couldn't. But he stopped being an active gatherer and became something else, a keeper of secrets. He would no longer spy for them, but he would also never speak against them. It was a devil's bargain that kept him safe but trapped him forever. The weight of this compromise explains so much about Dean's later years. The increasing isolation, the withdrawal from the rat pack, the reluctance to trust anyone completely. Dean Martin wasn't just carrying the burden of lost love or career disappointments. He was carrying the weight of national secrets that he could never share with anyone. But there's one more twist to this story that will change everything you thought you knew about Dean Martin's final years. When Dean's son Dino Jr. died in that plane crash in 1987, something inside Dean finally broke. Not just his heart, but his silence. Friends say he became obsessed with the idea that Dino's death wasn't an accident. He started asking questions about the crash, demanding investigations, making phone calls to people who preferred not to be called. His former handlers became nervous. Dean Martin, grieving father, was a wild card. Dean Martin, keeper of state secrets, was a potential disaster. They arranged meetings, tried to calm him down, reminded him of his obligations. But Dean was beyond caring about obligations. He wanted answers about his son. The truth is, we'll never know if there was any connection between Dino's death and Dean's intelligence past. The crash was investigated thoroughly by military authorities and found to be a tragic accident. But Dean's paranoia, whether justified or not, created a problem for people who had spent 30 years trusting his discretion. This is why Dean's final years were so closely monitored. This is why certain people were always nearby, always watching, always making sure that the keeper of secrets remained loyal to his oath of silence. Even in his grief, even in his decline, Dean Martin was too valuable to be left completely alone. When Dean finally died on Christmas Day 1995, the first people notified weren't his family or his friends. They were his former handlers, the men who had spent decades managing America's most unlikely intelligence asset. Within hours of his death, Dean's personal effects were quietly searched. His home was swept for documents, recordings, any evidence of the secret life he had lived for nearly 4 decades. They found nothing, because Dean had kept his word. Right up until the end, he remained the consummate professional. The secrets he carried to his grave were the final gift of a man who had spent his life serving 2 masters, his audience and his country. Here's what makes this story even more incredible. Dean wasn't the only entertainer working for the intelligence community during this period. The Cold War created opportunities and necessities that required unconventional solutions. Celebrity covers were perfect for gathering intelligence in places where traditional spies couldn't operate. But Dean was different from the others. While some celebrities were occasional assets, used for specific missions, Dean became a full-time operative, hiding in plain sight. His value wasn't just in what he could observe, but in how completely he could disappear into his cover. He wasn't Dean Martin the spy, pretending to be an entertainer. He was Dean Martin the entertainer who happened to be gathering intelligence. The documentation of Dean's intelligence work remained classified for decades after his death. It was only in 2019, nearly 25 years later, that the first hints of his secret life began emerging through Freedom of Information Act requests. Even now, most of the files remain sealed, their contents too sensitive for public release. But the pieces that have emerged paint a picture of a man who lived an extraordinary double life with remarkable skill and discretion. Dean Martin wasn't just the king of cool. He was one of America's most valuable intelligence assets during the most dangerous period of the 20th century. Think about this the next time you watch an old Rat Pack performance. That stumbling, seemingly distracted man on stage wasn't just entertaining the audience. He was working. Those glazed eyes were actually sharp and focused, memorizing faces, listening to conversations, gathering information that would later find its way into classified files in Washington. The apple juice in his glass wasn't his biggest act. The biggest act was convincing the world that there was nothing more to Dean Martin than what they saw on stage. And for nearly 40 years it was a perfect performance. So the next time someone tells you that celebrities are just pretty faces with nothing important to contribute, remember Dean Martin. Remember that behind the cool facade and the easy smile was a man serving his country in ways that required incredible courage, discretion, and sacrifice. The king of cool was also a keeper of secrets, and he kept them until the very end.
But there's one final secret that even Dean's handlers never knew. A secret that his daughter Dina only discovered while going through his personal effects years after his death. Hidden in a false bottom of his old briefcase was a single photograph and a handwritten note that revealed the real reason Dean had agreed to work for the intelligence community in the first place.
That reason, and that photograph, changes everything we thought we knew about Dean Martin's motivations. But that's a story for another day, a story that the government still doesn't want you to hear. The man who made millions laugh was carrying secrets that could have started wars. The entertainer who seemed to have no cares in the world was actually one of the most burdened men in America. Dean Martin lived 2 lives so completely that even those closest to him never suspected the truth. He was exactly what America needed during its most dangerous decade. Someone who could hide in plain sight, gather crucial intelligence, and never break character. He was the perfect spy because no one would ever suspect him of being one. That's the real legacy of Dean Martin. Not just the songs, not just the movies, not just the laughs. It's the knowledge that when his country needed him most, he answered the call. And he did it while maintaining the coolest, most effortless facade in entertainment history. The King of Cool was also a patriot. And that might be the coolest thing of all.